We start with a keynote, and we are planned to be divided in two halls. However, because we have empty spaces in this hall, if there are colleagues in the second amphitheater, they can come here. That will be much easier for everybody to follow the presentation, the keynote speech. Before we start and introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to make some few announcements regarding the conference. First of all, we have the voting for the best poster today. So more or less it's your last chance to vote. We have some excellent contributions from our colleagues who are exhibited in room D. And you can go there during the coffee break if you haven't done so already. And before doing that, you can go to the LIBER desk, take a voting card, and vote for the best poster. Later today, we will have poster presentations in amphitheater A and B here, instead of what is written in the program. So not in room D, but in amphitheater A and B. We also have on the LIBER desk some open science cards. You can find them in your bags. They are easy to fill in. You can write some information about your libraries, what you do in order to promote open science, what interests you regarding open science. And we have those beautiful boards behind the LIBER desk. You can attach them on those boards. They will be very, very helpful for us. And of course, you have the chance to enter a draw and become a VIP guest in Dublin, which, okay, VIP guest in Dublin sounds very, very exciting for everybody. I mean, okay. And the LIBER members can pick also their voting cards about the meeting of participants. So we have some voting later today. Those who are eligible on voting, representatives of libraries, they can take their voting cards and participate. So these are for the rest of the day. Right now we are welcoming Louise Page in order to give us a keynote speech. And the title is very simple, being open. However, we understand that being open is not a very simple thing, and we might see things from our library perspective, but let's hear what a publishing house, a non-profit publishing house can tell us about those things. And Louise Page joined PLOS, the Public Library of Science, in 2015 with a focus on innovations and strategies to transform scholarly communication. I will not say a lot about her work because I understand she has many information in her presentation, but I would like to say that in the past she has held leadership positions in editorial technology and strategy at Stanford University Press, HighWire Press, John Wiley Sons, and Oxford University Press. So I would like to give a round of applause for Louise Page.
There we go. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I want to thank the organizers very much for inviting me all the way from San Francisco. I don't know if I have the longest way to come, but it was certainly very enjoyable. I got my first chance to go through the channel. So I'm here today speaking to you as a publisher. I know that's a unusual person to be speaking to you directly as a keynote, but I think of our role at PLOS as one that, oh gosh, it seems so loud. Okay. So our role as a publisher as one that can help change the entire ecosystem, and as one that is participating quite heavily in what we all do collectively as open science. So I'm going to be speaking to you as a publisher from Oxford University Press, from John Wiley Sons, from working at Stanford University Libraries, HighWire Press, and then also where I am now at the Public Library of Science. So I think that we all, oh, hold on a second, sorry, I have to advance here. So I think that we all recognize that research is a very dynamic process. It is one that is highly collaborative. It is global. It crosses all geographic boundaries. It's very iterative. It is very revisionary, and it is full of trial and error. There's an enormous amount of research that actually results in a null result or a negative result, and then it gets put into a file drawer. So 350 years ago, we launched the first journal, and Philosophical Transactions from the Royal Society was first published in 1665. And at that time, it pioneered the concepts around peer review and around display and around dissemination of content, certainly in terms of its merit and its impact. And it provided the model that we all function under today. And in fact, shockingly, not much has changed since then. We still work with the article economy. We still have mangled research, which is a dynamic process, into a two-dimensional object. We trade in articles, we trade in PDFs. And even the peer review process has not changed very much. So after 350 years, what can we do? What can we say about this? What can we start to see and imagine as our future? So I think it's important that we look at the main problem that sort of underpins why we are where we are now, and why we talk about open science, and we talk about open access, and we talk about the need for scientific integrity and the research method to become part of the common good. And part of that is around these twin problems of assessment and access. So at the core of the challenges that we face is that the research enterprise is broken. There is an incentive system that is in place that rewards novelty and publication in a small number of highly selective journals. So this misalignment has several very key components. That the research outputs are not accessible, partly because they are behind a paywall, which we all know and fight about, but because they are also published, they're not published. So these are the things that are in the drawer, the things that generated the negative result or the null result. They don't make it out of the drawer. But secondly, the research assessment and incentive systems rely on measurements such as impact factor, which reward journal names and reward longevity and reward certain publishing practices. So this is a hyper-competitive environment that we find ourselves in. And these two problems reinforce each other, and they work against each other. It is not a mistake that those things look a little bit like shackles, because they do, in fact, create a range of challenges that we all have to overcome. The lack of availability of all of the research, all of the components, and all of the outputs means that reproducibility really becomes a problem. The thing that we want so much about how science will move forward can't happen the way it is right now. Publication is slow. Authors will sometimes have to go through 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds before they finally get accepted. And during that time, a lot of their science, a lot of their work will just simply stop. So these two problems have created a self-perpetuating state in which the research community feels shackled and resistant to change. So the older statesmen, the ones who were trained in this system, they don't have a lot of motivation or incentive to change it. And then the younger ones, the ones who are most vulnerable, the early career researchers, they also don't have the power to change it. So yet it perpetuates, and yet it continues. And so what I also want to highlight here is that this is where publishers saw an opportunity. This is where publishers capitalized on this particular set of tension to their financial benefit, to their longevity, to their size, to their reach, and that is also has contributed to the challenges that we have. And then there was the Big Bang. Then there was the internet. So I've been in publishing for over 25 years now, so I've seen publishing beforehand. I was at OUP when they actually rolled off the last book on a hot press. But the internet in 1993 really changed everything. I think we all can admit that. It was a revolution. It was such a momentous occasion that even though it was available in most research institutions around the world, in our collective homes and as part of a collective good, it was not something that we all were very accustomed to. And today it has completely changed how we communicate, how we shop, how we share information. But I think what is important to hark back to and think about is that in 1993, there were no rules. The internet was unformed. It was amorphous. It was whatever you wanted it to be. It was never meant to be a place where things got locked down, where things were not available. And so what happened is that infrastructures, tools, systems popped up all over the place. And they didn't care if they needed to talk to one another, or if they needed to integrate, or if they needed to interoperate. In the publishing world, it was a land grab. All you wanted to do was get online first, get your journals online. And the large society journals all of a sudden found themselves in a position where they didn't have the money, they didn't have the resources in order to participate. So they got acquired by the large commercial publishers. And so the big publishers, the big players, they got bigger. They had greater reach. They had more bargaining power. And so what we found is that 25 years ago is when much of this started because of the internet. We wanted the internet to do so many things for us, and unfortunately, it added a few more challenges for us. And so these silos were formed then. These infrastructure walls were built then. Access control was built then. And 25 years ago, all that technology still is in our lives. Much of publishing is built on very, very ancient technology. And so it is really time for a major overhaul. So with the internet, we had the opportunity to think about what if? What if we were to build this all today? Today, not 350 years ago. What would it look like? How would we have shaped it? Would we have designed the incentive system this way to reward people and their careers this way? Would we have recognized the cost of publishing in the form of subscription fees? Would we have shaped research into articles? And would we have made access to science a privilege rather than a common good? Very likely, the answer is no. This is what we're all fighting against. This is what we're all trying to accomplish together. So since we can't erase time and we can't turn it all back, what can we do? How do we do what is right in the face of so much might, when there is so many powerful players, when there are so many big players in the room? Is it an evolution or is it a revolution that will get us there? And in some ways, when you change one thing at a time, you'd be surprised how that can be absorbed and adopted, and then you can move on and you can change another thing. So what happens when you change the business model? Instead of subscriptions, you introduce open access, where you introduce a different way that the content's going to get funded. Where if you change the way the assessment criteria for what gets published, from novelty to sound science. When you change the role of data in a publishing decision as required versus, if you have it, let us know. And they'll change the role of metrics, instead of having journal-based metrics, moving into article-based metrics. And if you change credit, you recognize what people are doing in all parts, in all corners of that particular research enterprise, so that they get the credit and the recognition that they need for their career advancement. So in many ways, this is where PLOS came from. The Public Library of Science was founded by 3 people who, if you know them, you can definitely attest that they are revolutionaries. And they had a very big and bold goal for PLOS when they founded it. And it was to use and leverage all of this great digital technology to create, evolve, and promote the most effective path possible for scientists to communicate and collaborate their research. Now, we've done that as an early pioneer for open access, and certainly with the development of the first megajournal, PLOS One, but we certainly weren't the first to try open access. You know, there are many that came before us. But it was the scale, it was the size, and it was the sustainability that really attracted people to what we were trying to do and what we were trying to accomplish. So after 15 years, we have well over 200,000 articles. We passed that milestone last fall. We get about 200 submissions a day, and we have an enormous network of volunteers globally, 7,200 editors, 74,000 reviewers who all work with PLOS in moving forward these 7 journals. And it is an incredible network of researchers that really push all of this science together. So what's important to keep in mind is that we only changed a couple of key things. Changed the business model, and we changed the assessment criteria. And then slowly but surely, we're changing other things around data and around credit and around peer review. We didn't go as far as we wanted, and we still haven't gone as far as we wanted. We still have journals. PLOS is still working with journal economy, still working with an article economy. That was not the original vision. We definitely did not want to, we didn't want to shackle science any more than it already was. And we have, in some ways, become the thing that we didn't want to become, a mature publisher. And so that we have many of the same challenges that a lot of the bigger publishers have these days. But what is really important is that people have noticed. People have noticed that this kind of change can happen, that a single player, that a single act can, in fact, create something completely new. And when PLOS was formed, I was not part of PLOS. I heard all the stories, all the amazement, and all of the remarks that, gosh, how did we miss that one? How did we miss that particular trick? How did we not know that there was this much money in the author's wallet? So it didn't take too long before open access became good business. And I think we all know this. It has become mainstream. It is something that is in every publisher's portfolio, that everybody has some form of open access within their remit. And they have found it as a way to make even more money. And that's very true. Hybrids were developed. Cascade journals were popping up everywhere. Any journal that could fit a gap so that they could keep that article within their program is what publishers have been doing. What societies have been doing is to capture all of that good work in some form along the food chain. And there's certainly been the rise and the imitation of the megajournal itself and that model and how it can serve the sound science group. And the money has been good, perhaps, maybe a little too good, because we've had some consequences. Certainly there's the double dipping conversation that we've all had. There has been incredible price gouging. The idea that an article costs $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 in order to produce, accept, and make public is nuts. Big deals are forming around the open access economy. They're actually forming around, countries working with the big publishers to ensure that they have a bucket of money associated with open access. And so those new big deals are emerging. Sci-Hub has definitely come out of nowhere in the last few years and has really shown how all research should be available. Now, as an open access publisher, we certainly don't condone what they're doing from a copyright standpoint, from an ownership standpoint, but the researchers, they've noticed. They've seen this as, their next go-to. Predatory publishers have unfortunately tarnished a lot of really good work that we've done in the open access space and really sullied the quality and the standards that we have really tried to embrace. And one of the biggest ones, and this is the one that sits at our doorstep at PLOS the most heavily, is that the global market is not served by this business model. We talk about Western Europe, and when we talk about North America, sure, people have the funds, people have the means. But if you start dipping into Africa and to China and to India and to that world economy, it's not so much. And so we all collectively need to do something about, what is the business model that really does reach all corners of the world. So then if we didn't have enough to worry about, this happened. I don't need to say who it is, I'm assuming, because I don't know what will happen to me when I go home. But facts are under attack. Science is under attack. I'm sure that you guys have seen the videos, and you had them all here in Europe as well, the March for Science. I was lucky enough to be part of a couple when I was in the States, and it's amazing how energizing it is to be with people who think like you from all corners of life, marching against the same thing, fighting for the same thing. Fake news is so much easier to create and disseminate than facts. We spend an enormous amount of time with the rigor and with the process, and we make sure it's right, and we check and recheck. Fake news doesn't care. All of that stuff gets disseminated. The internet has made it possible for this to become a very big problem for us. Now, the good news is that, on the one hand, Pew Research tells us that in the United States, the confidence in the scientific community is still stable and strong. However, we also hear that 69% of Americans think that climate change is false. It's not real. And so how do you square those two things? How do we actually move forward? How do we change that kind of opinion when we are the custodians and we are the stewards of what is so important around the dissemination of the fact and of science? So while PLOS has demonstrated the power of open access and the sustainability and the size that it can become, we understand that we face a very different landscape now, and this is one that we all face. That open access has become a commoditized business model, and we want to build a future worthy of the legacy that we've envisioned. And so we have been thinking beyond access and beyond the article, because those are the things that everybody focuses on so much. What happens when you go beyond that? Where you think of a place where scientists can publish their findings immediately, decoupled from assessment and the significance of the work that they've done, where the results are readily discoverable, accessible, and usable by everybody, and where there is a robust assessment mechanism alongside the article, alongside the content, as well as after publication, to provide an accurate and evolving picture of the work's reliability and significance over time. Again, the work is dynamic. It's constantly evolving. And so where we have new structures to incentivize, to credit, and to reward working in the open. And there is an easier way for researchers to grant immediate public access and rights of reuse to any and all types of their output. So this is not all within, obviously, a single organization or a single part of the industry's control. We do have to work together. It does require a concerted work of multiple actors over many years. And so this is where I want to introduce the concept of coopetition. It's a combination of cooperation and competition. So in this model, players with multiple parts in this ecosystem that we find ourselves in, they can find common ground and create new alliances to develop the innovative change. And what we've learned at PLOS is that scale matters. You can have one of the most imaginative models, one of the most meaningful models in the publishing system. And if no one uses it, or only a few people use it, it's relegated to the heap of, that's interesting. It's not noticeable. So in order to really elicit change, we need to work together in order to move things forward, to demonstrate the change we seek. We need to show it. We need to prove it. We need to fail, and we need to talk about that too. We need to talk about our successes. We need to tell our stories. And then we have to have examples, and we need to have the data, which, remarkably, sounds a lot like publishing. What all of our researchers do on a daily basis in order to advance their careers. That's how we need to advance our career as well. So we have a shared responsibility to the researcher, to the research community, and to future generations. And so we should all take that up very seriously. There are too many forces out there creating friction and noise in the ecosystem to allow any one organization to make an impactful change. So that's why we all need to work together. We need to partner and collaborate. So I wanted to close with several ideas, several thoughts, and several suggestions for where we might focus, where we might actually have the most impact if we were to make a change. We need to improve incentives. We have said this over and over again. We have talked about this over and over again. I've said this several times during this talk. It is what is wagging the dog. The incentives that reward researchers for publishing high-profile papers in high-profile journals, if that does not change, then we're stuck. And so while the researcher's career is relegated to this and is in fact dependent on this, we cannot make a bigger change. The article will always be the article. And so until these incentives change, we really do need to, we will be limited by how much we can actually innovate. Open access allows everyone to access research. Open data allows everyone to do research. It is imperative that we require that all the underlying data be made openly available. This is something I've heard here, certainly something I've heard in many, many places. And it is something that PLOS has certainly embraced with our own data policy introduced in 2014, where all accepted articles must publish a data availability statement at the time of publication. And with very few exceptions, where rare species may be inhabiting or something that is particularly sensitive with patient information, every paper published at PLOS since 2014 has had this data availability statement. We have 98,000 articles now that do this. And that's just since 2014. Just imagine if more publishers embrace this, if this became part of your ecosystem to say that your researchers have to make this data available. And we can then imagine, assuming we change the incentives, they then imagine that there's a new form of content dissemination, that it could be data and code, that it could be infrastructure and tools to allow for that kind of reproducibility, that we can think about assessment and around impact, around whether or not your study was reproducible, whether your study was impactful to somebody else doing their research. We need to mainstream peer review transparency. And I say this knowing that PLOS does not do this now. We do plan on doing it within the next few months. But the greater transparency of peer review is fundamental to improving research, and we have to start with peer review. It is a valuable service. It is a valuable function, but we can imagine ways that it could certainly work better. We have an over-reliance on having a small number, 3 sometimes, reviewers to look at the content before publication. This creates real problems. It creates a speed problem. This is where the time to publication, time to decision problems sit, is with peer review. And then sometimes if an author gets rejected, they have to go through this multiple times. So they will find themselves in the system for months or years. And it also becomes more and more of a challenge as a publisher to have content such as data and code reviewed, because reviewers are not geared up for that. They're not prepared for that. They don't necessarily have the structures or the tools in order to be able to review this kind of content. So this does have a direct impact on time to publication, and the impact that this has on essentially slowing down scientific research. And so we think a very interesting starting point beyond transparent peer review is the preprint. So the preprint, for those of you who know about it, I actually have found that not a lot of people know what a preprint is, including our own authors. So we have introduced a new model where every author is given the option to post their article as a preprint. And so it's part of our checking process, and then we automatically send it off to bioRxiv for posting. And the take-up has been wonderful. It has ranged from anywhere, it's around about 17 or 18% of all of our submissions. But many people who say no actually don't know what a preprint is. So there's an education effort here. But the value of a preprint beyond the time to publication is that it decouples the act of publishing from the assessment. That whole peer review process can still happen in the background, but in the meantime, this particular piece of content is available, can be interrogated, can be reused, can be questioned. And I think that is really the part that really interests us in the preprint process and is interesting a lot of others as well. As we move towards a different kind of article, a different kind of content, we want to think about that, digital has given us the means to think outside of 2 dimensions. So most content is still in a PDF. Every publisher creates a PDF, even us. We were born digital, we were born gold, and yet we're still creating PDFs. And so we've been hampered by this approach and how we package the content and how we disseminate it. Research is not, as I've said before, is not article shaped. It needs to be rethought. We need to consider what are the different ways that the article can be changed so that it is open for networking, that it can be used and reused in its parts, not just as a whole. So how can we make sure that all those pieces work together for a new kind of article that will develop, have a different kind of hold and allow for a different kind of research product? Building sustainable infrastructure is not an easy thing to ask about. It's not an easy thing to do. I will tell you this from personal experience, as well as professional experience working at PLOS and working at HighWire Press. Most of the technology is over 20 years old, and it's certainly been updated, it's been refactored, it's been upgraded, but the basic footprint of what we use today is still about 20 years old, if not more. So when PLOS sought to replace its own manuscript system with a modern, flexible framework called Aperta, we spent 4 years and many, many, many millions of dollars trying to create and try to recreate the wheel. And that didn't work. And so we've actually recently decided not to do that. And that is a failure that we're willing to talk about and that we want to talk about. Because embracing technology as a means of delivering your business is a very good thing. But is it part of your core competency? So if it's not, you should be honest about that with yourself and say, should somebody else be doing this? Can I build off of a commodity? Can I work with others in order to move this forward? Can I use open source tools? Can I embrace open standards that will allow me to work with other systems and work with other organizations like myself? So the use cases are really starting to grow around the ability to have a shared infrastructure amongst us, that it isn't just these silos. As we break down the walls of access, as we break down the walls of this old architecture, what do we want to see come up in its place? What do we want to see build up in its place and replace it? One thing that we can all do is we can start with our people. We can build resilient organizations, ones that are open and are welcome to the change that we are seeking. So let me paint a picture for what a resilient organization may look like. It is one with sound leadership at all levels and strong cultures founded on trust, accountability, and agility. There's a foundation of meaningful core values that all members of the team believe deeply in and have a sense of team unity beyond what you find in many organizations today. And they have a compelling purpose to allow for constant growth. We are all just stewards passing through in our organizations. We all expect and want our organizations to move forward and to take forward the visions and ideals that we have ourselves, and we want to instill into the next generation. So it's our job to do that and to give everybody that firm understanding of that mission and vision so that they can navigate the road ahead and have a longer life, have a longer future. So in closing, I hope that I have given you some things to think about around where you can put all of your incredible energy and your motivation around open science and around the enterprise that we all are a part of, to imagine what your role can be. What is your capability? What is your particular strength that you can bring to the story? And then who you might couple with, who are your neighbors, who are your adjacents that you would want to work with in order to develop and demonstrate that change we seek. I certainly welcome the opportunity to work with all of you in doing that. Merci.
Thank you very much, Louise, for this very nice talk. We don't often, many times, people from the publishing houses admitting that they had failures. They present only successes, so I mean, this is very, very brave. So we will take questions right now, but because we know that in Amphitheater B we have some colleagues there, and we don't have any visual contact with them, but they can hear us, and we can hear them. I would like first to ask from the colleagues right behind this wall if they have any questions for Louise.
Do they have any questions? Do you have any questions? No, it looks like we don't have any questions here.
No? Okay, so questions from Amphitheater A, please. Yes, please. So are you ready to catch this microphone? Yeah.
I can't. Will you turn it onward? What's any
This is something Louise did because she's coming from San Francisco and we are having some baseball stuff coming.
It worked.
Okay. So please.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yes.
It's very strange, I know, to talk into a box.
So my name is Giuseppe Vitiello. I work for the NATO Defense College. My question concerns the process of research. So until now we have dealt with articles, processed articles. Now you are presenting preprints. And I would like to ask you whether you have thought of another mechanism, which is a kind of preprints. And this is how really research proceeds. When you start a research project, you do not have you have a clear idea of what you want to do, but then you move forward, then you stop, then you have another idea. And so it's not a straightforward process. So this works also for research teams. They move forward, and sometimes they may have the need of having different data from different places. Have you thought of a mechanism which allows research teams or a single individual researchers to launch an appeal for more data coming from from other places or even from other disciplines, which may help the progress of his research, and so that he can arrive to a straightforward, to a full concept, full research concept. And also, and this also, of course, does not only work for our world, but in continents such as Africa or even Asia, this must be the process, because, of course, they don't have all resources. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for the question.
Shall I? For the next, yes.
There are, in many ways, preprints have started to fulfill much of what you have suggested. The way that we've implemented preprints is when we already have a fully formed article. But many preprints actually go online looking for that kind of collaboration, looking for that kind of commentary, to say that this is something that's mostly cooked, but I'm looking for some feedback and some input. And we've seen, and we have quite a few anecdotes and stories of where that has, in fact, generated a paper where people who helped became co-authors. And so it definitely does build up community where there might not have been community before. So yeah, that is an area that I think is a perfect place for that kind of collaboration and that kind of building of that research. There's also new tools such as, commenting tools and ways that you can insert directly into the margins of the article, as if you were collaborating in Google Doc or something, how, the kinds of questions that somebody might have. And those are taking off, if you will, but they're not really quite there yet. I think we're still waiting to see the real, the best example for that. But there's a lot of different ways that the communication can happen. The other thing that we're suggesting and doing is that as preprints are gaining some steam, certainly in certain pockets of the biomedical literature, is that the large group of editors that we have, the 7,000 editors that are worldwide, if they were to generate some of the talk around those preprints at their universities, that they could actually generate comments and feedback for those authors so that they can continue to develop their article. And so it's becoming something that is both organized yet also quite casual. Uh-oh. Careful behind you.
May I speak?
First, Christina, and then... Okay.
Thank you. So my name is Christina Hormia. I'm the president of LIBER still today, and advisor to LIBER Executive Board for the next 2 years. So first I have a comment and then a question. So my comment is that we, libraries, we really much want to support that kind of approach you have. So we have published this week a LIBER roadmap on open science. So it's very much echoes with your ideas. And also I found that the recommendations which the Open Science Policy Platform published in April this year, they sort of very much echo your ideas. But my question relates perhaps more to technology and multidisciplinary research. So are you addressing the issue of multidisciplinary access to content, semantic interoperability? It's pretty hard, but I'd like to hear your answer.
So it is a very hard challenge, and it's something that we have experienced because of PLOS One in many ways. Because when you have an assessment criteria around sound science, you find that you get content from anthropology to zoology. And that's why the board is so big. because we have to cross so many areas. But that also gives us the opportunity to find those areas that don't fit into the normal taxonomies of science, where they cross over, where there's mashup of multiple groups. And we've been embracing that, and we've been working very hard on what are the editorial constructs and what are the profiles of the reviewers that we need in order to be able to move that content through. But it is definitely something that we've embraced as part of our portfolio without having to launch another journal. Because that's also what's happening, is that as people see this opportunity, climate change is one of those examples, where they start launching new journals, they start creating new properties. And we think that the content, that kind of content, and that multidisciplinary content can fit within what we already have. But it does need a careful eye, because it is emerging and it is burgeoning. And so having that network has been very helpful for us.
We will take another more question because we have to go for a break, and I'm sure that you will find Louise
Yes.
and discuss with her on the break. So are you ready to catch this? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Andreas Deckwitz. I'm from Humboldt University in Berlin. I have a question to the preprints. It's interesting to learn about the relevance of preprints, but how do you avoid that fake news are published by preprints? I wonder if this can be prevented by the following reviewing process. But if these fake news are in the world, they are in the world.
It's a very good question, and I think that's why the physical sciences community has embraced preprints for well over 25 years with archive, with very little effect, partly because the content itself is not quite so sensitive. When we embarked on this, we have about 40% of our content would be considered clinical in nature, has some sort of patient impact. And the last thing that any of us wants is to have another Wakefield paper, is to have another article that questions vaccines. And so we have been really quite careful around which content we put online, not because it's wrong, okay, or not because it's right, but that it's sensitive, and that we need more time in order to be able to do that. So the content that is going online as preprints doesn't quite have that public health concern. But we do within the first 24 hours that we get content, we can check and see, is it science, you know, at a minimum, and make sure that that is what goes online. But there is room to consider that the community will decide. That the community will decide whether or not the content is valid, whether it's reproducible, whether it's science or not. And that kind of tool set, that kind of infrastructure doesn't exist right now. But when it does, and this is something that we also are really exploring quite carefully, is how might that work with existing peer review, and how might it replace it?
Thank you, everybody. I apologize, we are not having a coffee break. We are going directly to the session, so that was wishful thinking, of course, for me. But before we leave, I would like